for one of the most valuable companies in the world, does that have a significant impact, or is it kind of just a slap on the wrist?
I think they net 40 billion a year last year.
I think it's over 50 now.
It's over 50 billion. So, the largest numbers we've heard was 5 billion, which I think was unlikely. Again, I would bet to be much lower than that. There's a point at which I think it makes sense for Facebook to accept the fines and kind of move on. There's a point at which it just makes more sense to litigate, and they can ultimately reject the fine and take the FTC to court if the number is too large. The other thing to think about is outside of fines, though, the FTC has the ability to bring injunctions against certain practices. And so I think that might be an area that we might look to as what is the long-term benefit of this settlement and what the agency can do to bring the company under order in terms of protecting consumers' privacy. So I wouldn't look at just the fines. I would look at what injunctions they recommend as well.
And Alex, you obviously were working at the company for many years. Has the FTC interviewed you in their investigation into Facebook?
They have not, but if they had, I don't think I'd be talking about it.
Had to ask. And so as this investigation is going on, you have deep insights into how Facebook operates as a company and how Mark Zuckerberg thinks. I mean, how much do you think this has influenced the company's recent announcement that they're going to make a pivot toward privacy and encryption?
Yeah, I think there are two things. Well, there's two or three things that have influenced that. First, Mark Zuckerberg is sitting on more data about what people want to do online than anybody else in the world, right? And that's why he keeps on making these decisions, like to buy Instagram for $1 billion or WhatsApp for about 20, that people think are insane, and then they turn out to be prophetic. And it's because he knows what direction the world is going. And so, one, I expect that entire direction of getting rid of of most of the public profiles, reducing the size of groups people are speaking to, that a lot of that is just going to be based upon data about what consumers want now and which way is the world moving. Second, I think it's being driven, yes, by privacy and the fact that both consumers and governments are asking for privacy, but then it's also driven by the fact that Facebook has this problem of trying to take a middle ground on a bunch of very difficult trade-offs, and that isn't working, right? So the metaphor I've been using is there's a bunch of trade-offs that are like knobs on a guitar amp. And one of the fundamental trade-offs there is between privacy and safety, that to find bad guys who do bad things and to stop them from doing so, including, say, Russians who are trying to influence an election, you have to know a lot about those people. And so if this guitar knob goes from 0 to 11, and Facebook's been bouncing between 3 and 7 on a bunch of them. And what Zuck has decided to do is he's just going to slam it all the way over to the privacy side, knowing less, but also then having less control. Because right now, what happens is you get criticized from both sides. Facebook knows too much, but they don't know enough about the bad guys. Facebook is a monopoly, but they don't control people's speech enough. And he's saying, okay, we're going to know much less about people. We're going to make money not via knowing about people and selling them ads, via other mechanisms, which he hasn't defined yet, and that'll be interesting to see what those are. And we're going to make people responsible for what they say and what they consume, because no longer will Facebook be able to decide what people see, won't be able to see if small groups of people are anti-vaxxers or if they're talking about things that the Washington Post does not want them to talk about. And the Washington Post won't see that either. And so he's basically flipped the table of saying, like, we can no longer try to rearrange little bits the only way through this crisis, which is both a privacy trust crisis, but also a people wanting us to control the speech of others. The only way to do that in a global context is to disclaim responsibility for everything. And that's what he's doing. And basically, he's kind of calling the bluff, right? Everybody's saying we want privacy. He's like, great, I'm going to give you privacy. And the scary side here is what's going on is that a lot of the safety stuff that Facebook has done is not legally required. Facebook, we were not required to go look for Russian ads in 2016. Like, our team took that on because we cared about it. And we found that stuff and then turned it over and disclosed it without any legal requirement to do so. But the privacy stuff is legally required. And so he's reacting to the fact that laws are only getting passed on one side, which is on the privacy side. And so all of the other stuff is kind of optional and is going to go away. And I think that doesn't mean that things are necessarily going to get significantly worse in all these areas, but they're, depending on the exact fine decisions that are made, it's definitely a possibility that some of these areas where Facebook has been able to get a grasp will no longer be under the control of the company.